In this video, we'll focus on healing various blemishes on the background area of the old photo using the healing, spot healing, and clone stamp tools. But first, let's go ahead once again and zoom into this portion of the image. In the previous video, we started out by using the clone stamp tool to really work in some of these very specific little finite areas, basically healing them, removing just the final remnants of those pen markings that we see there as I toggle the visibility of the wall elements layer. I also removed some additional little blemishes here and there on that portion of the image. And then towards the end of that video, we continued on where I started working on this portion of the image. And if you recall, I basically created a new layer based off of the areas that I was healing, basically selecting all that healed information, putting it on a new layer, which I titled BG Elements. Again, I'd prefer to keep a lot of these different areas on separate layers that I've been healing because it's just a good workflow, I think, especially if I need to completely revisit another area and I just want to delete all the healing I've done. I don't run the risk of deleting a bunch of information that I was actually happy with. So just continuing on this layer here, we're just going to move around the overall kind of general background area of the image. We might grab this spot healing brush and just any little weird spots that I see. Spot healing brush is great for that. The spot healing brush, you don't have to worry too much about having to be super mindful about where you sample from, unless, again, it's an area where you're coming up to an edge like that, where you just got to be very careful. Sometimes you'll get lucky. Sometimes you're just going to have to use another tool. So kind of continuing on with this arm, I might just want to go back to the clone stamp tool. Again, using a soft round brush, you're going to want to hold down Alt. And I'm using transfer with pen pressure for opacity and flow in the brush panel. And just working on this arm area right here. Again, just kind of removing some of that information that was left over from the pen marking. And just kind of zooming out, again, periodically toggle the visibility of the layer you're working on just to see your progress. Clone stamp tool works great. Again, coming up to just any little edges that you might run into. Especially right in here where we just got some very specific little edges. And of course over here, it looks like we have some bars on this window here in the background. So I just want to be very careful. Again, clone stamp tool I think will work. We'll get the job done. And as we start to remove some of these blemishes, sometimes it could be hard to tell what exactly it is. Is it something that was actually on the wall? Is it something that's part of the environment? Sometimes that can be difficult to tell, but you'll just have to use your discretion. If you think it's something that's just going to make the photo look better, if you feel like it's a distracting element, then I would recommend removing it. And I was turning off a line there. I noticed it was causing me some issues just where I was sampling. So sometimes I forget about that, especially with the clone stamp tool. If I've had that on previously, it can cause some issues where you're sampling from just an area that you might not want to sample from. So just zooming out here, liking how that's looking. And so we can start to move around here to different areas. One thing I will show you, so there's a lot that you can do with the clone stamp tool. We're not going to get into a lot of the more advanced stuff, but I will touch on one additional thing. If you come up to Window and then you go to Clone Source, there's a lot going on here in this dialog. We're not going to get into all of them. If you really want a more in-depth review about the Clone Source panel, we have a course in our library which I believe is called The Power of Healing in Photoshop. But I will just mention these right here. Basically, you can store basically samples on these different ones. So this first one's selected. So, for example, if I sample right here, then that's going to be the sample that I'm painting in. But if I jump to the second one here, selecting it, and let's say I sample just this really bright area right there. That's stored on that one right there. So if I were to come over here and start painting, I'm pulling in that information, right? And I'll go ahead and undo that. But if I switch back to this one where I've got that kind of darker sample, and let's say I came over here and I painted with it, you can see it's pulling from that. So it's a great way if you want to save some very specific sampling areas on some of these different little clone source little options right here. These little clone source placeholders, if you want to call them that. So I think that's pretty handy. So for what we're doing, there could be some areas where you might want to do that as we move around the image. I'm going to switch it up though. Again, going back to the spot healing brush. Spot healing brush works great if we're wanting to clean up just a lot of these little bitty spots, any little small fibers that just might have got stuck to the photo, anything that you couldn't brush off when you were scanning it. And what's great about the spot healing brush, if you're working in a pretty large area where you don't have any dramatic changes in your darks and your lights, you don't really have to think too much. That's what's really nice about it. You don't have to really spend a lot of time considering the information that's being sampled. And you might switch to the healing brush tool. I'll hit the right bracket, increasing my brush, and I'll sample from a specific area, kind of trying to clean this area up just a little bit with a little bit more precision. Again, both the spot healing and healing brush tool consider the texture and the transparency, the shading, the lighting. You will run into issues though when you come up to some edges where you might just want to use the clone stamp though. So just kind of moving around here. Just kind of any kind of little spots that I see. And again, you might want to right click and adjust the hardness of the brush. You can adjust the angle of the brush if you want as well. And then periodically, again, it's always good, make a comparison. We've cleaned up a lot of spots. This area right in here, we might actually want to use the clone stamp again. Still using a soft round brush. We'll make our brush a little bit larger. And I'll just go ahead and hold down Alt and kind of start to build that up there. Again, this is why I like using transfer. I'm not making a super hard application. I'm not making a completely opaque paste of those pixels that I'm sampling from. And again, just a few little extra spots here and there that I'm wanting to clean up. And again, around the edges of the image, I prefer to use the clone stamp just to clean up that information. All right, so very nice. Really happy with how things are coming along. We'll kind of finish out just kind of right in here again, switching healing tools. I see some little scratches kind of right down in there, just kind of cleaning those up. So what we'll do in our next video, we'll create another layer and we'll focus on just the foreground area right here around the bar stool area. We've got a lot of little scratches and scrapes and just random little blemishes. We'll clean that up. And then beyond that, we'll focus on a non-destructive dodge and burn technique. Once we get all these blemishes cleaned up, we'll kind of focus on how we can do that. It's a non-destructive approach, which I think you'll really like. And then after that, there'll be one final video where we just add some final touches to really kind of help the overall image pop. So stay tuned for those videos as we continue to clean up and heal this old photo.